All right. So it's the top of the hour, and I'm very thankful for everyone that's joining us on today's panel discussion. My name is Naor Khazan. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Mindshift. And today's panel discussion is all around how post-acute care leaders are solving for prior authorization and benefits verification challenges. So it's my honor to introduce our panelists for today who've taken time out of their schedule to share their thoughts, their experiences. Leanne Parker is with us from Quantify Remote Care, Julianne Drion from MedQuest, and Wesley Bernhardt from OnePath Diagnostics. I will let them introduce themselves in a moment. And also moderating today's panel discussion is Tyler Wintz, Chief Product Officer here at Mindshift. And so I'll just let you give a quick introduction. Leanne, we'll start with you and go to the right from there.
Hi, everybody. My name's Leanne Parker. I am the CEO of Quantify Remote Care. It's a complete virtual care CCM RPM company, just very new care delivery, quite unique than others. I myself am an RN, but I also, obviously work bedside, but I actually built the prior auth systems and the utilization management systems nationally. So I actually designed them and built them out for the ones that you guys actually use for many of the national payers. So I probably have a very unique view as a nurse, as the actual builder and creator of those, and then as a patient myself.
Great. My name is Julianne Drion. I'm the Senior Director with MedQuest Associates. We do outpatient radiology centers, both IDTF and HOPD, primarily throughout the Southeast between several states.
And I'm Wesley Bernhardt, and my background is in the last 12 years I spent with Aurora Diagnostics as Vice President of Operations. I just recently started a new company that specializes in pathology staffing using digital pathology and artificial intelligence. And so we had a good deal of experience in my past life with prior authorizations in the laboratory medicine area.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introductions. Tyler, I'll let you do a quick introduction to yourself, and then I'll let you take it away as our moderator.
Awesome. Yeah, nice to have everybody, and thanks, Naor. I think it'll be great to chat a little bit about PA and some of the challenges, especially in the post-acute space that we're seeing. And really, I want to spend a lot of time talking about the future of authorization and how we can continue to contribute to making the authorization process more effective for everybody who's involved in the authorization process. So I think that's the best place for us to start is on the process itself. And so we have a great panel of experts here, as you heard, on authorization, revenue cycle, and how this process works. And so I think it would be great to start out with talking about generally, I think that probably everybody on the call knows, but I'll just level set for everybody, that authorization is a way for healthcare insurers, healthcare payers, to ensure that they're able to contain costs and ensure their members are receiving medically appropriate care, right? And so this is the primary goal with the authorization process. Typically, it's clinical data plus demographics data that gets shared with the payer, reviewed by clinical staff, by the payer against some set of predefined guidelines, and is then approved or denied back to the provider. And so I think it'd be great for us to start out talking about, from the process perspective, where are the biggest bottlenecks here in this benefits verification and prior authorization process, and then we'll move forward into how we solve some of those. So maybe, Leanne, I'm going to look to you first to kick us off here. What are some of the big bottlenecks that you guys are seeing in the prior authorization process at Quantify?
So coming from where I built that and to the other side of it and actually utilizing it, the biggest bottleneck is that on eligibility and prior auth, and also on claims, no payer is absolutely the same, even though they're supposed to be, especially on the claim side. But on prior auth, they use different vendors, they use different intermediaries that review these things, and it's very cumbersome and very, very, very difficult to navigate. And it was very frustrating for me because when I was on the other side, I thought I built it quite simply. But now that I'm on this side again, I see that there's a lot of barriers and red tape, and you really have to dig and waste tons of time to locate the appropriate places to go for special plans or subsidiaries of the, like if it's Medicare, Medicaid, like which one do you go to? It's a lot, even though I'm an expert in lines of business and national healthcare. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Oh my goodness. Julianne, are you guys seeing the same thing as what Leanne described?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we've had, benefits, eligibility is eligibility, but sometimes the benefits differ, especially in the outpatient space. So eligibility tends to get you kind of your generic hospital, outpatient surgery, inpatient. When you try to dig into detail, that can get complicated. I know on the radiology side, we've struggled with that and having to find vendors that can support where it can dig into the actual radiology benefit, which can differ. To Leanne's point too, they use vendors, radiology space, they do a lot of that. So ABC insurance company goes through another vendor for only radiology. And so it gets a little complicated. The people trying to get those authorizations have to understand that, where to get the information and make sure they're going to the right place every time. That is definitely a bottleneck in trying to get through.
Tons of like tribal knowledge essentially is how do we know where to go to submit the stuff that we need to submit in order to, and trying to guess what should I submit in order to make sure that I get
sometimes
you feel
like you feel like
I was going to say, oh, sorry, guys. It's very plan dependent too. Like if it's one PBM could handle something and then all the other rest of the plan, but then in, for example, Florida Medicare Advantage, only one group handles that and it's not even the same vendor. That takes a lot of skill and knowledge and document. It could even be by zip code. That's how cumbersome. And I know because I helped build it, so I saw that. It was awful. You could be right next to your doctor, but couldn't go to them.
Yeah, same thing on the commercial side too. Your Blue Cross in North Carolina is vastly different than Blue Cross in South Carolina. They all have their intricacies and you've got to know them to manage it.
Yeah, so it sounds like the biggest bottlenecks are not only how do we know what the right benefits are for my specific specialty that I'm providing, but also how do I know where to submit my authorization to, and then what do I even need to submit? And I know Wesley in the lab space, this is rampant as well, right? It's the same story here, where how do I know where to submit for my diagnostic or genetics test or whatever I'm trying to do?
That's exactly right. And I think that's, you hit the nail on the head. What are the clinical requirements? And those are specific to the test. And in the laboratory space, there are so many molecular and genetic tests that require these prior authorizations, and each test will have its own subset of what's necessary to be submitted. And then, as they just said, it's going to vary from carrier to carrier. So you're dealing with a very challenging requirement. And then when you're outsourcing this to vendors, if your space is smaller, if they're mostly dealing in different specialties, having someone in the laboratory space that understands the laboratory space can be a little challenging too. So we almost end up having to teach before they go to work and working in that space. So it's it makes it tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's especially in the, I know in the genetics testing space, it's impossible to know everything that you need to know because of how frequently new tests and new types of therapy are coming out. And it's as we continue to get more and more personalized medicine, this is not going to slow down the amount of authorizations that are required and the uniqueness of all these authorizations.
And you can appreciate that. I mean, we're talking about high dollar testing, but at the same time is of the essence because these patients are waiting for treatment. And it's really crucial that treatment happens right away. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, we experience that a lot with interventional radiology. It's kind of the more intricate what you need to do is, the harder it is to get authorized, and those are the patients with the greatest need. They're the ones you really need to get in and going quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is great, and I think that probably everybody who's listening here has experienced the same challenges. I think from from the authorization process, the same bottlenecks here. And so let's talk a little bit about what are some of the processes that you guys have seen address some of these bottlenecks, and then how do you know whether that process or technology is even effective at helping you address what you need from an organizational standpoint?
I can kick that one off. So for us, we did a lot of digging to find, number one, an eligibility vendor that will get to radiology benefits, and that was hard to find. So we managed to do that, and that's helpful. But throughout the authorization process, I hate to say it, we've got people double checking as time goes on to be sure we still have the right eligibility. And in the time of the Great Resignation, or whatever kind of the term is, those tenured employees become so valuable and critical because they've learned, for this payer, I go here, they can teach other staff. I feel like really retaining those folks, making sure that, you know, we keep them on board is really critical, because it does take a long time to train when it's so difficult. For us, we actually have a homegrown front-end system for authorizations because we struggled so much with other systems years ago. We have a homegrown PACS and then a homegrown, we call it Q-Confirm, that we utilize for authorizations. That does help us in trying to kind of prioritize work queues, make sure we're getting authorizations, do double checks where we have to. It's very work intensive in my opinion, but the double checks sometimes are what get us there and keep us away from denials. Especially, you know, some of these payers take a while to get an authorization from. So we have managed to set the system so that by payer, physicians understand when they're ordering how long it takes to get it off and what's realistic to get them in. That starts with scheduling all the way through the auth process, but it has to have multiple checks, unfortunately, to ensure we ultimately get the correct auth and the patient's ready to go when we've got them scheduled. You know, like everybody else, we got to move fast. We can't delay people's care. So it takes a lot of double checks in our world. Anyway.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Julianne, because it is significant. It's a significant amount of work when you have people that are calling and they say, oh, well, I just heard from, you know, Bill that I didn't need an auth, and then I called back in and I heard from Seth that I do need an auth and this is what's required, and then you got to call back in again to try to, you know, figure out which of the two is actually the correct one. And it's you know, and it's just a significant amount of time to figure out, you know, what is the right answer to this question that we're trying to get this patient processed.
We do, and we do have one tool that will let us know authorization required, authorization not. So it helps that we at least have that documented. But even with the automation, by the time the claim goes through, it doesn't always land where they said it would land. So, you know, I think the automation helps a lot, but it's not always 100% correct. Like Leanne was saying, you can ask 3 times in one day, you're not always going to get the same answer. So, but there is some automation that can at least let you know what the requirements are so that staff can work on the accounts that need more of a focus.
I think that the time that's actually spent on an authorization, I remember when I've built diagnostic imaging, sleep, cardio, medical oncology, radiation oncology, cardiovascular or invasive. I've done interventional radiation or radiology. The time that's actually spent, I used to have, when I would speak even at things like this, when I was building these or in the national level, working for the payers and the plans and the intermediaries, I actually built the system, and I would tell the people, the users, the end users, you have to speak up, because I had people calling saying it took 12 hours, a full day of them trying to get a PET scan, which was just asinine, absolutely asinine. And so you have to speak up and let the people know, for one. So honestly, Tyler, in our processes, which Barb could probably tell you, that my director of revenue, I always say either I have a mental illness or I'm just punk rock, because I'll go to the top and complain and let them know there's an issue, because they don't know, you know. And I actually remember at one point, a higher up at a plan could not get an imaging needed on a weekend. And then he realized the problem. He didn't even know how to get it himself or how to get the doctor to navigate. So my processes, I will speak up and I will, fortunately I have still have a lot of contacts and I can reach out to them. I know we all don't have that, but if you don't speak and your time sucked, that's awful. And you have to speak up to it, and it just keeps repeating otherwise.
Yeah.
And obviously the process that I have in place, I had found Mindshift when I was still working for a PBM, and I was looking for ways to streamline it and make it automated, and assist in driving down provider abrasion, as well as on the other side, decreasing that overload and automating everything. And so I obviously use Mindshift. So that's what I'm at.
So I would just agree that, kind of in the same sense, communication and consistency, those are the two biggest things. We used outside vendors predominantly, and the biggest challenge was getting the outside vendor to understand what was needed to get it done. Just like you said, and some people might say, hey, I'm paying the outside vendor, the fee's fixed, so why do I care? Well, it matters, because if they don't do a good job, then you're going to be dealing with a new person the next week. You don't have that consistency. We've already got enough employment issues out there. Trying to keep people in the same position is hard enough, and I think we all realize that. So we tried to keep, communication steady with the vendors, so we knew what they were addressing, and make sure that we had consistency with the personnel, both on our side and theirs. So they were constantly talking, and we weren't having to always recreate the wheel. But that's a real challenge, and so we've looked to do as much automation as we possibly can. And
because automation is key, because 87% of the requests are absolutely appropriate. I did a lot of data analysis in a decade. 87% are absolutely appropriate. It's just answering the questions incorrectly or going to the wrong vendor of that entity. Or, and then about 10% of those, if it gets to the 97, 10% of 100, right? So 10% of those were actually something we had to tweak a little bit. Like maybe we saw they had a kidney function issue and that they couldn't have dye, but they submitted for a CT with dye. So, the automation aspect of it is the only way for the future for these bottlenecks to be dropped down. And that's why I want to go towards automation.
Yeah. This is great, because I think that one of the things, especially as we're talking about technology and how technology plays a role in how these processes work, one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome when we're thinking about how technology works in these processes is, how do we deal with interoperability? So how are you dealing with getting data from one system to another when you're thinking about doing authorization, or just using technology to augment the authorization process?
So I might give you a fail scenario, but we did try to utilize some automated authorization processes, and we could get data there, but the way that the payers interacted and sent information back and forth, it became more problematic for the staff to interact with the payers through the tool than just to kind of go back to the old-fashioned way. We're still looking to try to find a better way to do that, but sometimes they're really work intensive, and we need to be, they've got to get through a lot of authorizations, and it was taking us more time through the tool. So we're actually trying to look for something that's a little more robust, just because it really didn't meet our needs. The one tool that at least tells us authorization yay or nay and can hit a work queue with the answer, that's great, that helps. But we haven't gotten to the part where we can actually really work on a detailed automated.
I think we're going to be working towards obviously API and interoperability. Like right now, what we're utilizing now, we have the data input ourselves. But as we grow and have grown, we're definitely going to do an API connection and have ours, which is Mindshift, sitting there automatically doing it, because I've seen it work. So I know that it will work if it can be automatic and it's still not human error entering data and hitting the wrong keys or the wrong issue. All done all the time. And that what's slowing us down is obviously, you have to deal with every tech group I've ever worked with, and Tyler can appreciate this. You have to plan and know which run and what you're going to do on that run. And we have a lot of issues trying to possibly get things that we think are important up in front, right? Because everybody's triaging what they have to do first. So I think technology and our tech staff, that would be the biggest one to get the interoperability built out.
Yeah.
So
I
Leanne, when
would
you're
also,
thinking about, oh,
I'm
please,
sorry,
Wesley,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I got to believe that AI is going to play a role here as we continue in the future too. The learning tools, reasoning AI is going to be a
Yeah.
great opportunity for some savings here. You know, as you teach the program and it continues to learn what to do and what not to do, it's going to be extremely helpful towards the future.
Yes.
Yes. And maybe for the technology that is in place, do you have homegrown systems that you're doing the integrations with, or these WorkQ integrations with? Is it an EHR vendor that you're working with and you have to convince them to do some amount of work? What does that look like, and how is that slowing down or speeding up what you're doing?
Ours is homegrown. So, it's like anything else, it's a double-edged sword. I kind of feel like in our healthcare world, if you have Epic, world is your oyster. The second you're outside of that kind of system, folks struggle to interact with it. If you can do an HL7, great, most people can. But when you get outside of that with more detailed information like authorizations, I think it just gets difficult and some of the technology doesn't seem to be there. Our homegrown does allow us to do some interesting things with workflow that help us know when to prioritize. But it can make it tricky because it's not, it's not the norm. It's not what folks are used to working with. So getting it up and running can be more problematic.
Mine's going to be with a vendor, obviously, because we have a vendor that we utilize for our EHR. We call it an EHR. It's our EHR, but what we utilize to work out of. And, it's a very unique one. And so, and again, you have to get the time to actually get the integration stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, our physicians, typically the insurance companies want the physicians to perform it, but we as the laboratories, a lot of times they're looking for someone to help them take on that role because they are not always proficient in that. And so you're kind of taking, and the insurance companies will want you to do it in this system. The physicians will be in their own system, but at the end of the day, they're looking for help. And so what's the path of least resistance to get that assistance to get this done, and who's going to get it done more quickly? So a lot of times you jump through a lot of hoops, and automating it, at least with the options we had to date, weren't so great.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So Wesley, that's a great point, because in a lot of cases, and we see this more in post-acute care or ambulatory care settings than we do in acute care settings, but you have a physician or provider who is actually prescribing a set of services to a patient, but then a different provider who's actually on the hook for getting reimbursed, for making sure all the documentation is in order, but they're typically not the one who is supposed to submit the authorization, because the referring physician is the one who's supposed to typically submit that authorization to the payer. And so one of the things that is kind of coming more common in the authorization space is this idea of gold carding, and gold carding different providers so that you're able to bypass this authorization step or help minimize this burden of who needs to submit the authorization. If you can become a gold carded provider, then you kind of are eliminating some of this. So let's jump and start talking about some solutions, because we promised that we would spend some time talking about the future of authorizations and not just complaining about the existence of all of this stuff and all the challenges that we're having, as though there are aplenty. And so what's the perspective here on gold carding and how gold carding is going to help or impact the authorization process as it exists today?
Who wants to go first?
Well, I know on we use two different systems where we have systems in North Carolina, systems in South Carolina. We're connected to Novant with Epic, but then we have a separate system aside to that. In our North Carolina office, we've tried some gold carding with one or two of the payers, and it's worked fairly well. But I'm not going to say yet that process has eliminated all of the authorization work. They're not as, particular maybe, or they don't need as much information on some things that maybe they used to. we're just kind of dabbing our toes into a few payers that will, use us as a specialty and try to lessen some of that burden. And it's easier in our North Carolina sites because, again, we've got Epic, which is very helpful.
So gold carding from a payer perspective and the analysis I did when I was there, I mentioned before that it was, I saw a lot that when I did like a backwards look at it, because they let that happen, that I always remember patients at the end of all of this. And if they were gold carded and I saw, for example, radiation oncology, they were, put so many units in, that was probably, it was extensive. It shouldn't have been as many as they had put in, right, and requested for that auth in that disease setting. So, but then I always remember at the end, the patient would have a, copay and or deductible with that. So I highly disagree with always just blatantly putting them through, because eventually vested interest will obviously take over at times, and not everybody, and it can happen. And so, and I've seen it. So
yeah,
it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think gold carding, I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. You earn your place. But I think the reality is most providers and even insurance companies are subject to leverage, and your large groups are going to leverage them for gold cards, and your smaller guys may not have that same opportunity. They're going to be up against the real rules. And so you do have abuse in the system, and then it looks bad for everyone. And people that really went through the process appropriately may get hurt by it. So I think it's an idealistic way to look at it, but unfortunately, the way the system's set up, it's hard to really enforce it appropriately.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that the other challenge that we see with gold carding, and this piggybacks on what you just said, Wes, is that we're kind of throwing out the original intent of prior authorization, like kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like if the original intent was, let's make sure our members are getting the appropriate care that they need. And, we have potentially a bigger view or a broader view of what types of care our patient has seen over the course of a year, 2, 3, 4 years, however long they've been a member. And let's make sure that they're getting appropriate care. And it's gotten kind of twisted, and there's a significant amount of cost containment and stuff that comes along with prior authorization programs now as well. But when you go to a gold carding system, you're kind of throwing out a lot of that, the value that prior authorization can bring if it's done correctly from the payer's perspective as well. And so Wes, maybe I'll jump to you first, because I think that this is a good segue into this next section here on, we have gold carding. That's certainly an avenue that we can continue to march down for some of these services to make the PA process better for everybody. How else as providers should we be supporting payers in making this PA process better for everybody, and especially the patient at the end of the day, who is the one that is most impacted really by this authorization process, either by delays in care or care abandonment because of the lengthy time that it takes to do all these authorizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably, look, you're going to where they all are talking right now, which is what value are you bringing to me? What's the value in us giving you this gold card? How are you going to, show that this is a better situation? I think you really have to go through a grading process. What have you done? How have you made it better? And how have you saved our patients money, care, and done the right thing? And I think that's what you're really going to have to promote, to show the successes that you have, and making sure you're grading everything out to show that you are promoting the right way of doing things, and making sure that's there for the payers to see and review. But I worry about the politics in the system, and that always happens because of the leverage. But I think if you are providing, insurers want to see value-based opportunity, and if the value is in saving money and doing it the right way, and you can show grades that meet those requirements, that's going to be helpful to them.
I think if everybody truly knew the laws and the rigor around turnaround times and prior auth by state, by line of business, it empowers both ends, I think, expedites things. I used to call up my Bible. I had an Excel of every state, every line of business, every turnaround time. That's massive. That's empowering both ends to support the payers and the payers supporting us in the prior auth process to make it better. I think that we have such a web weaved in all the multitudes of areas, the navigation of it is difficult. It's like it needs stripped down and restarted. And I can speak to that because I was in it. And, you know, I think that outcomes and what I'm doing now is creating major outcomes with patients. Obviously, everybody touts, like, you know, it's the fee for service model, and then, you know, value-based care. It is a big deal. You know, we're like, we spend the most in healthcare, but have the worst outcomes. And so it's difficult. This is a very difficult thing. I just think there's so many layers and so many connectors to everything, like how many people are actually between Medicare, like CMS, to actually to the patient's delivery. You know, you're going to have like a TPA, and then you're going to have a vendor, and then maybe another vendor that's off of there, and then you have the provider, and then it goes, it's insane. You know, it's insane the amount that's there. So I think that if they would start doing an integrated care model that actually truly does look at outcomes, it's not really gold carding, and it's the best practice for the patients. And it's not just the standard traditional ones we have now. You have to be very innovative. And things can be, as Wesley said, I think AI is going to be key, obviously, in a lot of this, because the manual part of it, there's going to be a lot of error. And it's not just in the prior auth is a major piece, but I think in healthcare, this is the only work. Like, I've done a lot of work for my patients. I know the billing and eligibility and prior auth process. I'm not getting paid for the hours of work I've already done.
Yeah.
This is one of the only roles I've ever had. Like, I've done all this work and then I just don't get payment because I didn't put a 0 before my 1 on my claim form. And because the other payer wants a 1. So if we could get them all streamlined and on the same page and quit having so many caveats. If they're all a TPA of Medicare, why aren't they all doing the same thing? Why aren't they all requiring the same submission? Because none of them, they're all different. Every last one of them are different. And they should be held to a standard to create the same submission for everybody. That's what needs to be.
Right. And I think too, if both sides could have a little more, I guess I'm going to call it reasonableness. For example, you get authorization, it's for code 123.59. And when it ends up coming through encoded, it's 123.56. Instead of being reasonable about, okay, we're really dealing with the same thing, it turns into a denial nightmare. We have lots of centers. If the patient decides, I'm going to be over at work closer to another center, we've gotten the authorization for center A. If they switch centers with the same group, now you got to backtrack, get a new auth. And it's like, it's those kind of things that are, they're wasting time on our side, but they're really wasting time on the payer side too.
And Julianne, are they having the same TIN then too? Do they have the same TIN and they're doing that?
They do. And it's just they're going by location. It makes no sense. It's like, we're giving the same service. You authorize the service. Really, ultimately, what we're worried about is the service.
I did have an idea.
Pardon?
I was going to say, Julianne, I'm sorry to interrupt you on that, but when I was building, in oncology especially, I wanted to build one auth for an entire year. So Wesley's genomic testing, right? His molecular testing included all in there for the targeted therapy. You could take 36 authorizations to 1 for the one. We know what they need for breast cancer. We know what they need for lung cancer. Why are you making me go to this vendor, that vendor, that vendor, and that vendor for one journey?
Right. And I think that speaks to just being reasonable on both sides. We're all trying to do the right thing. If somebody's doing something way off to the extreme, you're going to see it in the data. We'll know it. We just feel like, you're adding a lot of extra work, and it gets in the way of getting that patient in the door and getting their care started and paid for. Patients want it paid for too.
I think that's a great point, is that payers can get a really bad rap, and many times deservedly so, and the transparency needs to be there. They need to be more open, because otherwise people look and say, all they're trying to do is deny my claim. They don't want to pay that claim. And they keep making me jump through hoops. And if there was more transparency, it would be a better process.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that one of the things the HITAC committee has recently sent a letter to the ONC suggesting that patients do get more involved in the authorization process, provide additional transparency to patients so that they can see what's actually going on. To Julianne's point, why do I need to get a new auth when I'm getting the same service by the same provider, with the same cost, the same everything, but I'm just going to a location that's closer to my place of work, closer to my, my home or something like this. And so thinking about some of these regulations, there's a lot of new regulations that are coming out. Gold carding is one of them. Shifting to value-based care payment models is another. Automated authorization or requiring HL7 FHIR endpoints for authorization processes by payers is another. I'm curious if there's any regulations that you all see could potentially be problematic, either to the payer, the patient, or to the provider, and why we may want to think again about any of these suggestions or regulations coming down the pipe to try to alleviate authorization strain.
In the radiology space, and if anybody's familiar with it, we have appropriate use, and that has gone on and off and on and off the docket. Right now, I think
I built that on and off and
oh my
on
word.
and off continually.
Yes, and it's for high-end radiology, so your MRIs, specific ones, so that they're not abused. I get that. The problem is that the physician has to go through the process to say if it's warranted or not. Then they come to radiology. If the physician didn't do what they needed to do, who's not related to radiology, radiologist doesn't get paid. And some of those that you feel like you're going through a lot of hoops, there needs to be a way that's efficient for everybody to go through the hoop and get paid where medically necessary services are truly rendered. We like the fact it's off right now. We'll kind of see if it comes back to fruition, but for that's specific to radiology, but that's definitely a regulation that's kind of a real big deal in our space for our Medicare patients.
And then the commercial is going to follow suit, and it's also really, I mean, cardiology is radiology, but in the cardiology world, it was major. It's a major impact there compared to just straight diagnostics.
Right.
I think the models coming out and the regulations, I think that the right people aren't sitting in the room when they're creating these things. You need innovation. You need people at the grind and the weeds, not just somebody who had practiced medicine 10, 15 years ago and have been riding a desk and do not understand the model. And they need the right folks there for sure. Because if it was built by somebody else that's more of an academic, they don't understand. Like I had gone in and somebody had like 30 questions for one prior auth that actually I could write in 3 to drive to what it needed to. So I think that the people that are creating them, that are chosen, I don't think they're reaching out to the right folks to build these things and to do the regulations at all.
Yeah, and that's good. I think because again, the push to try to minimize the burden there when you're talking about, how do we go from 30 questions down to 3 questions for the provider. This requires a level of familiarity with what is going to be asked and what's not going to be asked by the physician or by their staff on during the authorization process. And so do you guys think that it makes sense that we would have physicians getting engaged in some kind of a training program to understand how they should be documenting some of these things because they know that authorization is going to be a part of the process further downstream? Or should we be looking forward and beyond these kinds of things where physicians don't even need to necessarily concern themselves with how they're documenting things in the chart?
I mean, there needs to be a standard of documentation, and it needs to be appropriate. It needs to be the criteria that is evidence-based for that scenario, but every payer is different in what they're requiring. So they need to have, we do have to push the doctors along and teach them, hey, we need this for this scenario or this for this scenario a lot. But how could we train them unless it would be a standard across national, which those don't work either with credentialing agencies, but national levels or accrediting agencies to do this. I mean, yeah, you could train them, but then is it going to be standard across the board, or is it going to be, okay, this payer A and payer B want you this way, but payer C asks for that way? That's too difficult because nobody's ever going to be on the same set. Nobody, but we all have to educate them to get the proper things in to there. It's a lot. So I don't know that we could do that across the board right now.
Wesley, do you guys see in the lab space that you guys are having to go back to your referring providers and educate them on what types of documentation to include when they send you a referral?
Well, you do. You absolutely do. And they're pretty open and cognizant that this can happen. But I think there's questions too about, you do have, is it the appropriate test? But you also have, are the insurance company is asking the appropriate questions? Or is this more burdensome than it should be? And I think everyone's facing that nowadays. I mean, think about it. Think about where we are right now. We're in an inflationary period. Employees cost so much more. Every supply costs so much more. And we're the only industry where we can't raise our prices. Whatever Medicare is going to reimburse us, whatever Blue Cross Blue Shield is going to reimburse us, it's the same. We can't go back and say, hey, I need 10% more because of inflation. So we have to work within those parameters, even though our costs are going up. So when you have these additional burdens, it's very challenging. So the doctor is going to look for the greatest aid they can get to get the job done as quickly as possible, because otherwise it's coming out of their pockets as well. So they do want to help, but it needs to be a reasonable ask, I think.
Yeah. And that goes back to, I think, Leanne, what you were saying around how some of these programs get built, and do we have the right people in the room, I guess specifically in this case on the payer side, building these policies or building the legislation that would say, how are we going to make interoperability work? How are we going to get data from these providers? How are we going to do it in a consistent format? And this, it's a challenge, right? Because you need a combination of subject matter experts, and you need generalists, and you need technologists, and you need lawyers, and you need all of these different people to come together and actually understand this to a level of depth that we can find good solutions to these problems, where just one of those entities in and of themselves isn't going to be able to solve the problem the right way that benefits everybody. So let's, I do want to make sure that we stop maybe 5 or so minutes ahead of the top of the hour, so that everybody who's listening has a little bit of a bio break before they get onto their next meeting. So I'll let us finish up with this question here. Where do you see, or where would you like to see your organization and just generally the healthcare industry as a whole 5 years from now, and as it goes in regards to authorizations and the patient access authorization process?
Well, I think we also have a lot of AI. I know for us, if we can get to clinical doc information from physicians, because obviously we're not a hospital, so we don't have a portal we can go to. If there's some way to have a standardized electronic interface or something that allows us to get to physicians' data, kind of nationwide versus calling, faxing. A lot of physicians' offices still fax. And that to me is a problem. I think in the future, we have to find a way to get away from that. It's not efficient, but it's really not secure as secure as other things could be.
In 5 years from now, I hope that my dream of the one-auth and the disease set prior auth, and that everybody ends up on the same page and does everything the same, so that we don't have to chase rabbit holes for every payer and vendor. I think AI, yes, would be the answer, and obviously blockchain. Anything automated that's going to pull burdensome work off everybody manually. But, and I probably sound off the hook, but if they would strip it down and make everybody do it exactly the same, because I've worked for multiple national payers, exactly the same, it would be amazing for everybody at the end of the patient. They should make them all get on the same book and program and same way.
Yeah, and for ours, laboratory medicine and laboratory personnel are very much creatures of habit. And we're in a very exciting time in laboratory medicine, because we've got the advent of digital pathology and AI integrating into our system. And the AI is not just on the diagnostic side. You can see it on the grossing side and on the accessioning side. You're seeing automation in tissue processing and everything else. And so, I've always been a big proponent of that because we deal in such small margins and such lower reimbursement. We're continually getting hammered on the reimbursement side. So I've always looked for automation and technological advancement to try and see us move towards the future. And I think we're at one of the most pivotal points in pathology right now. So I think it's very exciting. I see in 5 years a very different landscape from where we are right now. And we and our new company has jumped feet first into that.
Yeah. You kind of look at the clinical side and it's so advanced. There's so many great things we can do. So it's kind of like, can we take that and move it to the operations? Surely we can.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and Wesley, you know this, especially like if there's a problem to be solved on the clinical side and in diagnostic labs, there's a very easy way to get your results back to your providers that have sent you. Yeah. It's all electronic, but some of these pieces really need to push forward. I think that some of the Da Vinci specifications that are coming out, they're going to make a big impact on where authorizations go in the future. And it sounds like automation and AI is kind of the big theme here of the things that we really have to do in order to figure out as an industry so that we can alleviate the burden here.
Yeah, and I think it's going to have such a big place, but at the same time, I don't think it's a total replacement. I think we all, we have to have oversight for all of that.
Right.
But I think you can get a heck of a lot more efficient. And I think right now, you look at it, one of the biggest challenges is we need it so bad right now. You can't find techs, you can't find employees, you can't find people. And what does that do? That means patient care is really dropping because you can't return results quick enough. And so it's really crucial right now for people to kind of be leaders and grasp this technology and take advantage of it so that we can deliver that best healthcare.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna hit the pause button there. We've got right 10 minutes till the top of the hour. I know that everybody who's on the panel, I appreciate all of the conversation. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully everybody who's listening, you guys had a lot of fun learning and alongside of us. The recording is going to be sent out, I think it'll be sent out tomorrow by the end of the week. I'm not 100% sure when the recording will be sent out.
Definitely tomorrow.
Okay. Recording will get sent out tomorrow. There's a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. I'm going to go through those right after this, and I'll respond via email to those. So if you see your question there is not answered, I'll make sure that we get back to you. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. I know that all of the Mindshift team and the panelists are happy to help answer questions of people that you have on authorization and just workflow here in general around RCM. But Naor, any last comments before we call it a day here?
No, I just want to thank the panelists, Leanne, Wesley, Julianne. Thank you so much for your time. You're busy and you're so passionate about this topic, and it was just great to have your insights. And thank you for everybody else who's spending a good 50 minutes of their busy days with us. So we appreciate it, and we hope to get some good feedback out of the survey so we can do this again. And that's all. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Wesley,
thank you.
And Julianne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.